Most of us probably take for granted how vibrant, clever, and resilient we are as Africans. Thing is, resilient is literally the understatement of the century, given the astounding 500,000 objects, our art, our history, and the literal remains of our living dead and ancestors, our memory that are in museums in the West, in random people's sitting rooms, aka private collections. That number represents 90% of all Africa's objects from before the colonial period. Gone, stolen, pillaged, grabbed, harvested from our royal courts, our holy places, our homes, and burial sites. How did our things get away? Can we get them back, somehow fix this whole situation? Over a 5-part journey with me, you will understand how Africa's heritage has ended up scattered across the world. That's 1 billion people who speak 2,000 languages, give or take 1,000, and who are descended from many different kingdoms and self-organized, decentralized communities, each with their own highly developed and creative ways of being in the world. No biggie. We'll also discover together the decades of work by Africans that continues to this day to repair the situation. Okay, this will be more like an introduction. To start us off, there's someone I'd love for you to meet.
My name is Syvlie Njobati Verge. I'm from Nso in Cameroon.
Who is Ngonso and how is she connected to your people?
She's been known now as the Queen Mother. That's the mother of the fawn. And because Ngonso was a woman in the Nso tradition plays a very, very critical role. There are rituals that cannot be performed in the Nso land without the Queen Mother.
Because we have Ngonso, the real person, our historical figure, to this object representation of her.
The object was made in her image. And over time, it wasn't just an object that passed on history from generations to generations. This object now became a symbol also to be used for rituals. For example, at the beginning of the planting season, this object would be used, to invoke fertility of the soil. So this became a key part of, I would say, the royal collection.
What happened to Njobati's people wasn't an isolated incident. There are 75,000 objects from across Africa in Germany's Humboldt Forum alone, including Ngonso. Many of these treasures belong to particular families and communities and were acquired in problematic ways. Sometimes there's not enough information about an object, which can feel very cruel. That lack of information about the objects is reflective of the violence, disorder, and sometimes plain indifference through which the items were acquired and taken to Britain, Belgium, Germany, Italy, and elsewhere in Europe and on to America. But they were certainly methodical. There were punitive expeditions, ethnographic expeditions, and missionary expeditions. Here's the deep dive. Punitive expeditions here means those events where Europeans basically created or took advantage of a diplomatic issue and sent a party of soldiers to punish an African kingdom or community. In some cases, they had already identified particular treasures or loot that they wanted to seize. Gonso, for example, was taken during one such punitive expedition. There were many.
When we talk about the provenance of Gonso, to understand fully when she was taken and how it was taken, I must say that it's a bit difficult to trace that right now. The records in Germany at SPK states that Gonso was brought in 1903 by Kat van Pavel. And so they claim it was a gift to Pavel because he brought it in 1903 to Germany. Yeah, but the controversy again around this gift is that that's the only object from salt that was brought in by Pavel. And we know how these looters were. No one would go and steal just one object. They looted collections. They looted thousands of objects. Then salt people, of all the objects they have that can be given as a gift to somebody, took their queen mother, their identity and their culture, and thanked a colonial looter for being the person they don't want to see. So it's very difficult to understand that.
One tragic affair occurred in Abyssinia in present-day Ethiopia. The Emperor, Tewodros II, a deeply committed Orthodox Christian, saw Britain's Queen Victoria as a fellow Christian monarch. So he wrote a letter asking her for Britain's help in dealing with his enemies, largely non-Christians, invading in almost every direction. Tewodros II gave the letter to the British consul in Ethiopia, and that's when the shenanigans started. It took 2 years for the letter to reach the crown and 3 before their lackluster response reached him at his palace in Magdala. By then, the emperor was annoyed and had imprisoned that British consul and the emissaries that followed. Determined to teach the king a lesson, Britain put together an army of 13,000 British and Indian troops, larger than any that had been seen in Africa until that point. Punitive means punishment. The year is 1868. Tewodros II's army is quickly overwhelmed, the European prisoners released unharmed. That's when we realized that securing their release wasn't the real prize. The British and the former hostages proceeded to loot Magdala's considerable treasures of their art, gold, silver, and sacred and ceremonial objects, carrying what they wanted on the backs of 15 elephants and 200 mules. On average, each elephant carried 700 kilograms, each mule 55 kilos. So we're talking about almost 22,000 kilos of treasure. Among the looters was the then acting director of the British Museum, who came precisely so he could select what he wanted. He made away with 350 manuscripts, loot. Orphaned, Tewodros II's only son and heir was shipped off to England alongside the loot and lived a short, solitary life, dying at 18. His remains are still in England, despite the repeated requests of his people. This type of military conquest is repeated over and over again across the continent. There's loot that's taken on behalf of the state. The soldiers themselves keep some objects to show off in their homes or eventually donate and sell. So that's punitive expeditions. Let's get into missionary expeditions, which had a different energy to them. You've heard it said, when the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, "Let us pray." We closed our eyes, and when we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land. It's a quote the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa and Kenya's first president, the late Jomo Kenyatta, have referenced in their lives. The land was only the half of it. Missionaries regarded African cultural practice as backward, as evidence of our heathen, pagan culture. and were determined to replace African spiritual practice with the Christian religion and European culture. So they implemented a de-Africanization campaign with many churches urging converted Africans to destroy the material culture that marked their lives prior to conversion, be it sculpture, tools for various rituals, or even grave markings. At the same time, missionaries were stealing and otherwise collecting these same objects and shipping them off to Europe, sometimes to show as part of their fundraising efforts for their work, sometimes to donate to museums, and sometimes to sell for personal gain. So they were telling us our stuff was too evil to exist, and then turning around and acquiring the same items, some of which is now displayed as art in Western museums. It's been painful to realize we suffered a double theft. I'll be the first to admit I have had my experience of African objects filtered through missionaries and colonizers. Some objects inspire fear and discomfort rather than admiration or curiosity. I'm starting to ask myself if these objects are truly scary. And if so, whether I'm supposed to be scared of them or consider myself protected by the fear they inspire in others who might wish me ill. There's a second issue here. Looking at it today, it's difficult to understand how the same object can be described as art and then as a ritual object, perhaps for spiritual practice or royal rituals. Is it one or the other, or is there a better way to think about this? I realized the colonial period is basically a crisis period of war and annexation. I wondered about post-independence crisis periods and whether these have also been an opportunity for the illegal export of material culture. So, we've talked about two modes of extraction: punitive and missionary expeditions. Colonizers also carried out ethnographic expeditions for science. Ethnography is a study and careful recording of how people live and behave. So they took objects to record what Africa was at that point. Remember, there was a competitive energy among colonial powers, like scramble for Africa energy, but in academia and museums. The ethnographic and linguistic mission of Dakar, Djibouti between 1931 and 1933 was one of the most infamous such expeditions. The project cost 1.3 million francs, raised largely from the French government, its parliamentarians, the scientific community, and private patrons. For 2 years, starting in Dakar, Senegal, the team worked their way through the vast territory we now call Mali, Burkina Faso, Benin, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, Central African Republic, the DRC, South Sudan, Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti before crossing back into Marseille in 1933. 3,500 objects from the Dakar Djibouti mission are now housed at the Musée de Quai Branly, including sacred objects and Ethiopian church murals and manuscripts. Some of the Europeans knew what they were doing was problematic. Michel Leiris, who handled the mission's secretarial duties, wrote to his wife, "I have the impression that we are turning in a vicious circle. We loot Negroes under the pretense of teaching people to know and love them. That is to say, at the end of account, to train other ethnographers who will also love and loot them." We've mentioned Europeans took human remains along with objects. It's a long and painful history that haunts us to this day. Our kin denied human dignity, reduced to a curiosity for exhibition. One of the more painful stories is Zahura's, more commonly known as Sarah Bartman. Look her up. She was taken to Europe in 1810 at 21 years old, effectively as a slave. She was dead 5 years later as a direct result of the physical and sexual abuses she endured. And even then, they denied her her humanity, displaying her remains in a Paris museum until 1974. The French finally agreed to return her to South Africa for burial in 2002. Hers are not the only human remains that have been kept in European museums. Some were acquired via grave robberies. Some were kept as trophies for those Africans who dared challenge Europeans. For some, we don't know their identities, let alone how they came to be in Europe. To this day, they have the skull of Kenya's Koitalel Arap Samoei hanged for resisting Britain's railway to present-day Uganda. They have the remains of Nama and Herero warriors of present-day Namibia killed in what everyone now accepts was a genocide. They have the skull of Shona spiritual leader Nehanda Charwe Nyakasikana and other iconic heroes of the First Chimurenga War. I'm sorry. I know I haven't mentioned every ancestor's story or name. I know their descendants continue to carry the burden of ensuring they are buried properly. It's amazing to realize that while Picasso was shuttling between Barcelona and Paris, studying African art and sculpture brought to museums from the colony to eventually develop Cubism. Or put another way, while Picasso was becoming Picasso, others were gathering decapitated heads of warriors, healers, leaders, mothers, and fathers. One Felix von Luschan, by the end of his life, had the remains of about 10 to 15,000 individuals from around the world, including thousands from Africa, even individuals killed in the Herero and Nama genocide. He sold 4,000 to 5,000 skulls to the American Natural History Museum for about $500,000 in today's money. They continue to be used for research. Picasso is a great example of what museums can do and be for a culture, a place of learning and imagination. Beyond the economic benefits of colonialism to Europe, having so much of Africa's cultural heritage has definitely contributed to European nations' own cultural development at our expense. There is a huge conversation going on around the continent right now that seeks to redress the situation of this dislocated cultural heritage. We're discussing how we might retrieve these objects and indeed how we might ready ourselves and our communities to receive it. We're asking ourselves what constitutes repair and healing. Restitution is the word Africans are using to capture the complex web of processes. It's what the extraordinary Syvlie Njobati is pursuing.
For some people, restitution to us means receiving back our objects that were stolen in colonial times. But it also means, more importantly, reconnecting to these objects, because we've been disconnected from these objects for more than 100 years. They haven't been in their place of function. We haven't experienced them in their purest form. How do we as community members connect with these objects again? It could also be for us about reparation. There was damage done during the colonial times. Our palace was burned. It was looted and burned. How can the Germans repair what they broke? So this would also be about compensation, which we are considering very highly. Otherwise, if we don't do this, people will sanction restitution as normal, as, they will sanction colonial crimes as normal. I can just come to your house and take your car and steal your car and then I keep it in my garage. I use it, I travel here and there, and then I bring it to you at will, and nothing happens. There must be a compensation for the damage, for the period of time that it was away from us, that it was disconnected from us.
Syvlie's is one of the many restitution cases by communities, kingdoms, and nation states to have looted objects returned and reintegrated into society. Find out about Ngonso's journey back to Cameroon next time. For now, I just have one last person I need you to meet before we go.
Hello everyone, my name is Chao Tayana Maina from Open Restitution Africa. We are an Africa-led project seeking to open up access to the information on restitution of African material culture and human ancestors. Thank you for watching this video. We're really excited to have you here. I'd like to invite you to watch upcoming videos, but also to share your personal and family stories down below. Help us get more young people in Africa and the diaspora talking about these issues.